Hey, this is Jerry from Bliz Studio, and what are we going to be doing in this tutorial? Well, we left off with working on our bounce game. We're going to go ahead and continue that, but we're actually going to look at adding touch events. So we have this game in the mobile format, but we're not using touch controls yet. So now we're going to go ahead and implement those touch controls. So we're going to be able to gather information from where our finger touches the screen. We're going to then use that information to update the location of the paddle. And we're actually going to be able to use our device directly connected to Unity using Unity Remote 5 application. So if you're ready to implement touch in your Unity editor, let's go. Okay, so here we're back in Unity. So what we're going to do is to go ahead and we need to take our controller. So here we have our controller FSM that moves our controller and moves it back and forth. What I want to do is, so I've disabled that controller. I'm going to go ahead and create a new FSM specifically for touch. So the way I'm going to do that is to where it says move controller down in Playmaker. I'm going to add FSM. Okay, so I'm creating a new FSM and I want to just call this state. Let's call this touch off. So that's when our finger is not touching the phone. I'm also going to create a state that's going to say touch on. So that's when our finger is touching the phone. So let's go ahead and add a new state. So I'm going to right click or control click, add state, and we'll call this one touch on. The other thing I need to make sure that I do just for cleanup and house cleanup is I want to label this Playmaker FSM because again, you might have tons of different FSMs on your game objects for different types of things. But for this one, this is going to be specifically touch move, and that's fine. Cool. All right. So now that I have that done, I've got two states. There's nothing in them yet, and it's not going to make our controller move. So what I want to do is I need a touch event. Okay. So if my finger touches the device, then I want to then trigger off or fire off an action that goes to touch on. And then if I lift my finger off, it's going to fire off an action that's going to take me back to touch off. Okay. So touch on, my finger goes over to touch on. If my finger comes off, it goes back to the off state. Okay. So here I need to add a couple of events and I'm going to add a new event called touch on. And then I'm going to add one more event called touch off. There we go. Okay, so I've got those in there. I need to go ahead and add those touch events. So let's give that a go real quick. So I'm going to go touch. And then you can see I've got touch event as an option here. And let's make sure that I'm in my state and we'll go ahead and double click that. So in the off state, if our finger touches, we want to go to the touch on state. So where it says send event, I'm going to do a touch on because that's where we want to go. And it's saying, hey, you don't have that added to your state. So let's go ahead and add it. Then I can drag over to touch on. And then I'm going to just copy and paste that, or you can drag it back down, whichever. I'm going to paste that back in here. And then instead of touch on, I want to do a touch off. So the touch off. And it's saying, hey, we don't have that event set up yet. So let's go ahead and add that transition and go back. Okay, so we've got that set up, but how are we going to know if it works? Well, we're not unless we have our phone connected to our computer. So the application that you want to use is Unity Remote 5. So Unity Remote 5 allows you to directly connect your phone to your computer. And then within the editor, any touch events, it will recognize and you can see it within the game window. Okay. So get that set up. First, you need to download Unity Remote 5. And then once you've done that, and if you open up Unity Remote 5, it'll tell you that you need to go to Edit, in Project Settings, and then under Editor, you'll select Unity Remote right here, and Device, you can choose the device that you have connected. So you can see I have my iPhone XX Max connected. So that's the phone that I have connected. And so it will recognize any of the touch events that I have on that device. Okay, so that's good. Now, if I click play, it's going to take just maybe a second and a half or something. It might be different for your device, whatever. But for my setup, it takes about 1.5 seconds for it to actually show up on my phone. But whatever's in the game window actually shows up on your phone. And now, I think there's a little bit of lag in this. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit play. And if my finger is on the device, it's should go over to the touch on. And if it's off, then it should go back. So let's go ahead and give that a test real quick. This might take a second to just load up. And then it takes a second to connect to the device. Boom. So there we go. You can see it touched my finger off. And then now it's off. So there we go. So we know that the touch events are working if our finger's on the device or if it's off. Okay, so now that we know that's working, what we need to do is set up actions within our touch on that's going to allow us to drag that controller back and forth, or at least the paddle back and forth. So here's what we need to do. What I want to do is I want to gather touch info. Okay, so what's happening with my finger while it's on the screen? So what I'm going to do is, while touch is up over here in my search, you can see here's the different types of touch events. So there's touch event, and you can see I've got an option for get touch info. So in the touch on action, I want to do get touch info. So I'm going to drag that down. And then what is it that I want to do? Well, I want to gather the information whenever my finger is moving left and right. So that's our x-axis. So what I want to do is I want to store that information in the x, y, or in the x-axis. Okay, so I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call it touch x. Click create. All right, so let's give this a play real quick. So here again, we have our debug option selected. So I should be able to see whatever the results are from my finger moving back and forth. Again, it's not going to move our paddle yet, but at least we're seeing what's happening with the numbers. So again, we're just gathering that data. Boom. So I'm touching it, and now you can see my finger's all the way to the left, and it's almost 1, all the way over to the right, or vice versa, I mean, and it's almost 0.
Game over.
Okay, so if we look, you can see that in the get touch info, we've got an option that says normalized. So normalized number is from 0 to 1. So if it's 100%, that equals 1. If it's 0%, it equals 0. Okay, so that's important to recognize. We're using normalized numbers. All right, so we're gathering that data. That's awesome. Okay, so what we want to do, and again, we're gathering that every frame. So where our finger is every frame while it's on the screen. So now that I have that set up, I want to go ahead and do a screen to world space. So whatever is happening on my screen, I want to translate that to something happening in the world space. Okay, so let's go screen, and you can see here's squirrel to world point. That's exactly what we want to use. Drag that down. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to take that touch X variable that we've gathered, that 0 to 1 number, that normalized number, and we're gathering that here. So we're going to use that, and then we need to convert that into Unity's world space. Okay, so that world space is in meters. So if we look at our screen here, you can see that there's all these little boxes. Each of those represents 1 meter. So we're taking this number that's from 0 to 1, and we're translating that into world space. Okay, so the other thing that we need to look at is I want to also, if I'm using normalized data in the gathering information right up here in my get touch info, I also want to use normalized information here as well. Okay, so we've got we're gathering our touch X, we're using it here in screen to world space. We need to convert that, and then we're gathering that data, and here is where we need to store it. Okay, we're going to then translate that into a different number. Okay, so I'm going to create a new variable, and I'll call this touch X move. Okay, so I have that, and I also want to update this every frame as well. So I'm going to update that every frame. Cool. Again, this isn't doing anything for us yet. We're just gathering some information and storing it, converting it, and then restoring it again. So now we need to go ahead and use that information to move our paddle. Okay, so I'm gonna open up my paddle or my controller. I'm gonna take my paddle, drag that down into my action as well. And I'm gonna go game object, and I wanna set property. So what property do you think we need to update on our paddle? We need to update the X, right? We need the position, okay? So we're gonna go and we have the object, we dragged that down. I definitely wanna update this every frame. And what property is it that I'm gonna use? I'm gonna use transform and position, and I'm gonna use the X position, okay? And now we have a value that's set as 0, but what we wanna do is uncheck the use variable option, and then we can use one of those variables that we just set up. So we're not gonna use touch X, we're gonna use touch move, right? We're taking that screen space, translate it into world space, and that world space is what we wanna use. So I'm gonna click touch X move, and then let's go ahead and give this a test.
Game over.
Okay, so we can see that it's working. The problem that I have though is that world space, because I'm using a normalized number, that world space is only moving my paddle 1 meter, which is not very far. So if we look here, right, each one of these little squares is 1 meter. So I'm only moving my controller that much, and I need to move it a lot more. So what I want to do is multiply that normalized number that I've gathered by a bigger number, okay? So to turn it into a bigger number. And the way I'm going to do that is use a float multiply. So if we look at the variables, we can see that these are floats. So I can see touch X is a float. So let's go ahead and do a float multiply. So I've got a float multiply here. So I'm going to drag that down. And I'm going to drag it down underneath my get touch info. And so what I want to do is I want to take my touch X, right, that first number that we're gathering, that normalized number, I want to take that and I'm going to multiply it by a number. Okay, so let's just say 10. We'll have to see that. And we also want to make sure this is happening every frame. So that 0 to 1 number, we want to take whatever that is, multiply it by 10. Okay, so let's give that a test real quick.
Game over.
So that's working. The problem that I have now is that the numbers that I have, it's taking the 0 position of the paddle, which is at the middle of the screen. It's taking that and it's multiplying that number. So we're really taking from the middle of that screen and going to the right. And so what I need to do is to offset that by half, okay? So we're gonna take whatever that number is and divide it by half before we multiply it, okay? So we're gonna do a float subtract. And I'm gonna have that before float multiply. Okay, and it's saying, hey, what variable do we wanna update? Well, I wanna take the touch X, that's that 0 to 1 number. I'm gonna subtract it by half, so by 0.5. So whatever that number is, subtract half. And I wanna do that every frame. Then we're gonna take that number, multiply it by 10. Then that's the number we're gonna take to then change from screen point to world point. And then after that, we're gonna use that number to then update our paddle position. So let's give that a test. Yeah, that works just
Game over.
So it's just a little bit laggy on the Unity 5 remote, but at least we know that it works. Now there's a couple other things that I can do just to make sure that my paddle doesn't go out of view or it doesn't go beyond the screen dimensions. I can actually take and do a float clamp. So it's saying whatever number that we create out of all this calculation, we can take and say, hey, don't make it any more than, this number or this number, okay? Okay, so I have my float clamp and I'm using that touch X move and I need to clamp it to a minimum and a maximum. So if you play your game, look at the number that's here within the screen to world space, you'll see kind of what the maximum and the minimum should be within that number. For my device, it's -4 and +4. So all I need to do is within this min and max value, just add -4 and 4. And so now my controller won't go past those numbers. So let's go ahead and give that a test real quick.
Boom! Game over.
Okay, that's cool. So I just had an issue where I somehow switched some numbers here. So just to go over these again really quick, just to make sure. One, I took the touch event that takes us back to touch off, I moved to the end of the list. Okay, so that's the first thing that I needed to do. The other thing, and so we're starting off with get touch info, and we're storing that in touch X. Then I'm subtracting that number by 5 or by 0.5, so it takes wherever half the screen size is or half the screen width and subtracting it. And we're doing that every frame. Then I'm also multiplying that number times 10. Again, that's a number that you could probably play with just a little bit. And we're doing that every frame. We're going screen to world point. So we're taking the touch X data that we, did the subtraction and the multiply times and storing that here, or we're going to utilize that, take that, convert it into world space, and then we're changing that or storing that in touch X move. And then we're updating our paddle. I can't grab that controller. Then we're updating our paddle based off our touch X move. And then at the very end of the list is touch event, which then if our finger comes off the screen, goes back to touch off. And there we go. We actually have a cool working controller. So you can use this for everything. If I wanted to use that touch event and that multiply, whatever, I could use that for the Y value of our controller. I can use it for the Z value of our controller. I can use it for updating the opacity. So if I move my cursor left, or maybe if I move my finger left, maybe it's at 0% opacity, and move it right, it's 100% opacity. The options are limitless for what you can do with that. So there you go. There's using Unity Remote 5, adding touch events to our game so that we can actually control the paddle with our screen. And there we go. And because this is just a little bit on the confusing side, what I'm going to do is down in the description below, I'm going to list out in the description the events that I've used or the actions that I've used and what my numbers were so that you can use those as well for your own example. Wow, that was another great demo. We used Unity Remote 5 directly connected to the Unity editor to control our game and what's happening in that game. And we actually implemented touch controls so that we can move that paddle. Again, please share these tutorials. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and that little bell icon down there so you know when the next tutorial is available. Until next time, peace.